Discovering the Jesus Dynasty. It is a rare book that is 40 years in the making. In some sense, this is the case with the Jesus Dynasty. Over 40 years ago, as a teenager, I made my first visit to the Holy Land with my parents and my sister. I knew nothing of archaeology, the Dead Sea Scrolls, and other ancient texts or historical research, but I had begun to read the Bible, particularly the New Testament, and had become fascinated with the figure of Jesus. I vividly remember walking around the old city of Jerusalem. The city was thick with tourists, all Christians, no Jews or Israelis. This was before the 1967 Six-Day War, when the old city of East Jerusalem was still ruled by Jordan. We saw all the sights typically shown to Christian pilgrims: the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the Mount of Olives, the Garden of Gethsemane, the upper room of the Last Supper, and the Dome of the Rock where the ancient Jewish temple once stood. Over the 3 days we were there, I began to experience a growing sense of disappointment. I was having difficulty connecting, even in my imagination, 20th century Jerusalem with the city in the time of Jesus as described in the New Testament. Even if the names and places were the same, what I saw before me were Turkish, Crusader, and Byzantine remains, with little if anything from the 1st century A.D. visible. Even the modern street level, I learned, was 12 to 15 feet above that of Roman times. I'd purchased a tourist guidebook entitled Walking Where Jesus Walked, and somehow, in my naivete, I wanted to do just that. We stayed in a small hotel on top of the Mount of Olives, just to the east of the old city. About midnight, restless, I got out of bed, Bible in hand, and decided to walk to the Garden of Gethsemane at the foot of the mountain. The steep path down is now paved, but I could see bedrock cut or worn along the way on both sides, indicating this was the narrow road from ancient times. I imagined Jesus riding the donkey down that very path into the old city, hailed by the crowds as the Messiah a week before he was crucified. In 1962, unlike today, the gate to the Garden of Gethsemane was always open. You were allowed to walk among the centuries-old olive trees. I was the only one there that night at that hour. My reading had convinced me that this was the spot where Jesus spent the last night of his life in prayer. For the first time on our tour, on that path and in the garden, I was able to reach back and connect with the past that I sought. I kept thinking to myself, this is the place. It happened here. The historian in me was awakening, and I think a bit of the archaeologist as well. I'd begun what would become a lifelong quest to discover and to understand the life of Jesus as he lived it. Many sites in Jerusalem have now been excavated. You can walk or sit on the very steps that led up to the Jewish temple built in the time of Herod the Great. When I first visited Jerusalem in 1962, these steps were 25 feet below the present surface, completely lost to modern eyes. All over the country, the past is being exposed to the present by the spade of the archaeologist, and equally by the deciphering of ancient texts by the historian. I have been back to Israel and Jordan dozens of times as a researcher and scholar. The Jesus Dynasty is a new historical investigation of Jesus, his royal family, and the birth of Christianity. It proposes an original version of Christianity, long lost and forgotten, but one that can be reliably traced back to the founder, Jesus himself. There is a sense in which I might call it the greatest story never told. It will thrill and excite many, upset and anger others, but also challenge its listeners of whatever persuasion to honestly weigh evidence and consider new possibilities.